Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Early Intervention Matters podcast series. And I hope you've all had a good week. Thank you for joining us once again. I decided to do a podcast on faith and neurodiversity. And this was generated, or this podcast was based on a recent event I spoke at. I spoke at a Christian event. I spoke on autism spectrum disorder and neurodiversity in general. And it was an interesting session because it did generate a lot of questions and lots of interest. And it became clear that this was an area that we needed to do a lot of work on because the experiences from a lot of people in the faith community who have neurodiverse children, some of them have been negative, and also I did understand that we do not have the level of knowledge that we should be having within the faith community. So I felt that it was important to talk about the role of faith communities, including churches, in supporting families and children with neurodiversity. So in my previous episode, we did touch on and talk a bit more about what we meant by neurodiversity. And just to sum that up a bit, we talk about neurodiversity. People who are neurodiverse have their brains process information in a different way, different from what we understand with typical development. So it's not that the brain, it's not that they have something wrong with them. They are just different in the way they see the world, they process information, and our role as families, as parents, as professionals, as members of the public is not to want to change the child. What we should be doing is understanding how that child sees the world, how they process things, and help to put the adjustments needed so that they can function and do all the activities they want to do like any neurotypical child can. um, in my previous episode, I used an example of glasses, me wearing glasses, as everyone can see. If I don't have my glasses with me, then I can't do anything. I can't read my computer. I can't produce my work. I can't see the children I see on a daily basis. But when I have my glasses with me, I'm functioning like every other person, including those who do not have glasses on. That's exactly what it is with a child with neurodiversity. Yes, so I'm Dr. Inyang Takon. I'm a consultant neurodevelopmental pediatrician. I have been practicing for over 20 years, seeing children who are neurodiverse, and I work independently and also in the NHS. I'm also a co-founder of School Doctor, which is an enterprise that bridges the gap between children within families and school. I'm the host of Early Intervention Matters podcast. This podcast was set up about 4 years ago to help to bring information to parents on several areas of neurodiversity. It was meant to help parents understand different types of neurodiversity and so that they can be able to support their children better. So that's how I've been running this podcast series. And if you go to www.drtakon.com, you would see the range of podcasts we've had over the years. I've been interested in the issue of faith and neurodiversity because a lot of our children do attend faith communities with their families on a regular basis, and families, parents of children who are neurodiverse do face a lot of challenges. And it's become even clearer that those communities many times do not have people who are aware or have the understanding of neurodiversity. So the way they support children or understand or behave towards children who are neurodiverse can be such that some families have actually stopped attending the faith communities. So if we think about just using the church for an example, if we think about, the church on a regular basis. Most churches will have periods of singing, have periods of, loud music. Depending on the church, it can sometimes be low key or it can be very heightened with very loud noise, loud sounds, people singing on top of their voices, clapping, which are all very good forms of worship. But but many times we do this regularly and we don't even take a second thought to think about how this might appear for somebody who is neurodiverse. Now, if I just backtrack a bit and think about what are the challenges a person with neurodiversity may have, one of the commonest things that they might struggle with is being sensory overloaded or very sensitive to loud noises, busy environments, lightings, noise, or people touching them or coming really close to them. These are all things that people with neurodiversity can struggle with. But if you think about church, these are all things that can happen in church. People coming to hug the child, the loud noise, the busy places, people running and moving about all the time. So you can see where sometimes this can be very difficult for families. Sometimes as parents are even approaching the church, the child starts getting distressed. Might even be difficult to get the child out of the car to get into the church because the child is already anxious and anticipating what that environment is going to look like. So if we, as worshippers or members of the church or people who are workers in those faith communities, are not aware or have an understanding of neurodiversity, the approach to managing the children might sometimes be inappropriate. Some families have reported how they have been told to leave the main church and go somewhere else. Some families have seen people sitting close to them move away. And so some families have felt isolated because people don't want to sit close to them. And all these behavioral patterns that are seen towards the child and family can make it quite isolating for the family. Some families have even had comments, very negative comments directed towards them. They've been blamed for not being able to keep the child quiet. They've been spoken to harshly, and this has left families feeling quite isolated. They carry a stigma, and sometimes some families opt not to go to those places of worship, which is quite sad because these are families who really want to be in a place of worship and sharing the faith with other members. Because of the lack of understanding of the behaviors of the people within that community, it has prevented them from actually going to the place of faith. So this brings to mind why it is so important that the faith community invest in educating themselves, providing that education towards supporting families and children with neurodiversity. If we start first from the point of assessment, some families are not even aware that their child may be neurodiverse. They may be saying those behaviors they don't understand because the child has never had that assessment done. I've also known of families where they've been approached by professionals saying to them, we think your child may be neurodiverse, go and get assessed. But the reactions from the people in the faith community has made the families not go for the assessment. Sometimes these families, that faith community is where they trust people there, and they hold them in high esteem. They hold whatever they say in high esteem. So when they then get the information from the same people in authority, their pastors, their leaders, saying to them, you don't need to go for that assessment, or you just need to pray and everything will be okay, or you don't have faith. Why don't you have faith that your child will be healed? When you have them hearing from people in authority telling them these things, it is quite sad because I as a pediatrician have actually seen families who have refused to go for assessments because they've come under that umbrella or stigma where they've been told they don't have faith, or they don't have faith that their child is going to be healed, or their faith is not enough, or they're not praying enough. So not only are these families dealing with having a child who is neurodiverse, they're also dealing with the guilt that they feel they have been responsible because they haven't had enough faith to actually enable that child to be healed. We also, apart from the delay in diagnosis, people are not being signposted as church leaders and people in authority. We expect that they should be encouraging these families to go for assessment. But you can see where there's been delay. I particularly know of somebody um, who had this experience where the school had mentioned that their child was neurodiverse, shared it with their community, and it was completely no way, don't go for that assessment. Your child is being labeled, and they have refused to go for that appointment. And as a result, that young person has gone through years and years of struggles, not having an assessment. And sadly, it has continued because that young person has not gone for that assessment based on the wrong information that was given to them. So I just want to bring this to our knowledge that as a faith community where children come to regularly, we do owe children and families that duty to advocate for them. For parents that do not understand, the church community or the faith community can be that place where they actually provide the information for families. Because we shouldn't forget, this is where the families come to. They trust us. They trust us in those communities. And so that's from the point of assessment. What also happens when people have had an assessment and had a diagnosis? We talk about adjustments being made in the church, at schools. We talk about the schools making adjustment for the children, but it's the same child that presents in the faith community with their parents for worship. So what happens to adjustment in that society, in that community? Sadly, many children do not have the support in place, even when the diagnosis has been made that they have these conditions. There hasn't been, any adjustments being made, which is sad. So the type of adjustments that should be made in these situations is providing sensory gadgets for these children. So the church should have lots of sensory gadgets, should have things like fidget toys, they should have weighted blankets. The church should have a sensory room where children can go in and, they're in when they're quite distressed, and it just helps calm them down. Things are turned down, the lightings are low, they've got soft places to sit on. And if we do this, even little changes can make such a huge difference to a child. Now, a lot of faith places have, children's area where children go to do their own worship. It's important that people who are leading those areas have a good understanding of neurodiversity. The reason being that those leaders are responsible for so many children. And these are children, the other children who are neurotypical do not understand at that level the behaviors of the neurodiverse child. If we have a leader who does not understand neurodiversity, then they're not able to support the child, and there can be conflicts between the other neurotypical children and the neurodiverse children. I was once a helper in a children's church, and we had to help the other children to understand when we had a neurodiverse child, because the neurodiverse child will have their own things that they like to play with. And so we became proactive of putting their things in a particular case where they could easily reach, because they would want to play with that all the time. It's not proper to try and force them to do things that will distress them. And I've seen this happen before, where the neurodiverse child has their preferences for what they want to play with, but because people do not understand them, they're trying to force them to do other things which they do not like to do. It's so important that, because these negative experiences in places like faith communities can be quite detrimental to the child and the whole family. We have to remember that children are made in God's own image, and that God, you know, has space for everyone. If we read different faith texts, I am a woman of faith myself, a Christian, and I use the Bible, for example, where we are taught that there are diverse people in the world, and our duty is to love them just like, you know, they were loved by God and loved by Christ. And if we are following the teachings that we've been brought up with in the church, then actually the faith communities, the churches, are supposed to be one of the most accommodative places that we find. But sadly, that's not the case. So we do really need to look into those places where, as church leaders, as workers in the church, being able to support children because we want them to come in. Children that are made in God's own image. That's what we're taught all the time. They are made in God's own image, and they do need to be, supported within those spaces. So what can church leaders do? What can pastors, what can faith leaders do to prevent these negative experiences? The first thing is education. Faith leaders need to realize that neurodiversity is important, just like the teachings of faith is important. People need to go for training. The faith leaders need to signpost their members. I do feel every member should understand about neurodiversity. I do feel that it is also appropriate for there to be a focus on neurodiversity during one of the Sundays that people go to the faith communities. There should be a session devoted to neurodiversity because it is important that everybody, I don't feel it's just the workers, I feel that everybody, every member coming to the church, that's an opportunity they should have to get educated on neurodiversity. Having a slot on a Sunday, now and again, to talk about neurodiversity is important. Telling people how do neurodiverse children present, how can be supported within the church, how do they behave differently. Just people understanding those differences can change the perspective of people and how they respond and react to the families. We've seen this happen where families with neurodiverse children who came to, when I was working as a children's worker in church, where they were so full of appreciation that they didn't have to worry about their child in the children's church because they knew that their needs were being met. And they narrated the story of the negative experiences they've had in previous faith gatherings. So, educating the members of the public, the workers themselves going through more training on how to support and signpost families to resources, I feel it's extremely important. We all have a purpose, we have a part to play. And I do feel, and I'm using this medium to call on all faith communities, big or small, please prioritize learning, disseminating information about neurodiversity, educating members about neurodiversity because it's really important. Faith leaders or people working in the churches or workers should encourage families to seek assessment. Don't forget, I mentioned that sometimes the families are completely reliant on the advice given by their faith leaders, and we've had people who have refused to go for assessments because they've been told that all they need to do is pray, and if they haven't had the results, it means they haven't prayed enough, which is quite sad for a family who is already burdened or who is already undergoing that burden of dealing with the challenges of navigating this process, then being told that they don't have enough faith. So please, pleading with people in the faith community, leaders, workers, to please change that narrative. These families need all the support they can get from yourselves. They need your support in encouraging them to go for assessment if it's been identified that their child is neurodiverse. They also need support for knowing that when they come into their places of worship, they will not be stigmatized, but they will be supported, and their child will feel at ease, and their child will be loved and understood and accepted, and that the child will find the faith community a peaceful place to function. So, again, remembering that the reason we are in the house of faith is because we believe in those teachings, which includes being accommodative to every man, person, anybody around us, showing love, being compassionate, being kind, not isolating people, but embracing differences. These are the teachings that we've all been brought up with. So we need to be translating this in practical terms when it involves people with neurodiversity. It's been quite sad sometimes when I read narratives on social media about how people interpret people's differences. Sadly, social media hasn't helped. There's a lot of sometimes negative press on it, and families sometimes leave feeling even more guilty. It is quite sad, and I do hope that we can change this narrative, because where parents have gone for some comfort, for some hope, for some understanding, should not be another place that inflicts trauma on them. And many families have experienced trauma. We should think ahead for families. Sometimes families are coming, they're carrying lots of they have, sometimes wheelchairs, they have, things which feel to them, oh, I'm not going to find parking, I'm not going to be able to navigate that place today. If we think proactively as a church community, then we can begin to make those accommodations for them within that building space so that the families are not under pressure. Because it can be challenging getting their child with neurodiversity ready in the mornings to leave the house and go to, and go to their school. So the same challenges they have to get the child ready to go out to school and to different places, they can also experience that challenge on a Sunday. And sometimes they don't even have the help they have during the weekdays when the child goes to school. So you can imagine what the families are having to deal with on a daily basis. And then come a Sunday where they should go and have peace and calmness, they actually have that fear and anxiety about going in. So I do want to plead with our faith communities that our neurodiverse families and their children, they need to be supported. There needs to be understanding for them. There needs to be patience. There needs to be, support. They need to be loved. They shouldn't be differentiated based on their neurodiverse condition. They shouldn't be isolated. They shouldn't be stigmatized. They should be embraced just like any neurotypical child is embraced. They should be embraced. They should be included. This church needs to be inclusive. It shouldn't be a place where the family faces another layer of segregation on a Sunday or whatever day that the faith event is holding. There needs to be resources available to support them whilst they're in that environment. I'm pleading with our faith leaders and church community. Please know that it's not just prayer. Um, we prayer is very important, but it's how we pray, what we pray for, and not saying that child should just be cured and therefore they will not be neurodiverse again. But you can pray for the right resources, you can pray for the right support, the right help. And yes, I'm a woman of faith myself, and God does answer prayers, but we need to do our own part. And we need to realize that these children have lots of talents. And if we don't create the space for them to, showcase that talent or be able to, explore and develop that talent, then we're never going to get that child to make the best use of their potential. There are neurodiverse children who are very good with drums. very good with singing different parts of music. Music is something that neurodiverse children are very good with. I know a young person who taught himself to play the piano, and he plays beautifully. Just amazing sounds. And if the support and the enabling environment was not available for that young person, they will not be able to showcase that talent. That young person is autistic, but if that support was not available, they will not be able to showcase that talent or that gift. They are gifted, and that gift that they have can also be used in the house of faith. So I do want to plead again, I'm pleading with our faith communities to embrace neurodiversity. Don't see neurodiversity as an illness that has to be cured, or someone or children that need to be isolated from the rest of the neurotypical congregation. They enrich the congregation, they enrich our fellowship, they enrich our places of worship. But if we don't invest in understanding them and knowing them and loving and appreciating them and including them in whatever is being done, then we're going to miss that opportunity. And very soon you would then have a family who has chosen not to engage. Our neurodiverse children are also gifts from God. Every child is a gift from God. Neurodiverse children are gifts from God. We need to, embrace their differences, because when we embrace their differences, we can then see the gifts that they have and we can nurture those gifts. They're not, they're not incorrect in the way they behave. They're just different in the way they see the world. So I just hope that, you know, this session today has helped to throw more light on how faith communities can support families who are neurodiverse, how faith communities can play a part in the process of signposting parents to getting the right assessment and diagnosis, and how faith communities can support families who already have children who are neurodiverse. So I would really recommend that to understand more about neurodiversity, I would like to signpost, you to the podcast website, www.drtakon.com, and also to School Doctor website. So School Doctor is a social enterprise which was co-founded by myself and two other colleagues, and this was meant to bridge the gap between the church, between the schools, parents, and health professionals. And we offer support, we offer training, we have resources, we also provide assessments as well when needed. But that website is a hub of resources and information that people can access. So I'll signpost, really say people should visit that website, because it does help people to understand perspectives and also understand their child's presentation. So I just want to thank you very much for listening into today's podcast. I just hope that this is the beginning of many more conversations that we need to have about faith and neurodiversity. I'm happy that I've been able to share what's on my mind as somebody who's a health professional, a neurodevelopmental pediatrician, but also someone who's a woman of faith and who regularly attends church, and who has also worked as a children's worker and been able to see where good practice helps to support children with neurodiversity. I want to advocate for training for workers in the church, but also pleading with faith leaders to also highlight neurodiversity to the whole church or faith community regarding how children present, the different ways they present, and how they can present. So I'd like to thank you for listening in today, and I look forward to being with you again soon for my next podcast session. Thank you very much for listening in, and wish you all the very best in this journey.